I remember a month when my son, Jonathan, was homesick with the chicken pox. He was 6 years old at the time, didn't have any brothers and sisters. He wasn't handling it very well, but my wife doesn't work, so luckily he had her to take care of him. About a week into his illness, I came home from work and greeted my wife at the door. I asked her how Jonathan was doing. She told me that he had struggled to eat, but managed to get some food down and was now asleep in his bed upstairs. I crept up to his room to take a peek and see if he was doing okay. And as the door creaked open, I saw him sitting up in bed. I entered the room and sat down on the bed next to him. "How are you doing, buddy?" I asked. He told me he was doing okay, but that he was finding it hard to sleep. I gave him some tips I know, like holding your shoulders further away from your head and lying in an uncomfortable position for 10 minutes before switching to a comfortable one. "Okay," he said plainly. I asked him if he wanted tea or water or anything, but he said he was okay. It was then that I noticed some pieces of paper with writing on them on his bedside table. "What's this?" I asked him. He tells me that he made a friend in the neighborhood, and they were communicating via written messages on paper through the window. My son's room is at the back of the house, and we live in a new subdivision that backs onto a forested ravine. Naturally, as a parent, I felt a little concerned that he was talking to someone in the backyard. "How old is your friend?" I ask him. 7, he replies. I breathed a sigh of relief. I flipped through the rest of the written pages briefly, just to make sure his story was lining up. It seemed like pretty normal kid stuff. When's your birthday? What games do you like to play? That sort of thing. I put the pages back down on his nightstand and left his room so he could get some sleep. The next day, I came home to find the back door wide open. It was very early in the spring and it was freezing in the house. Somehow, my wife was fast asleep on the couch on the main floor and didn't even seem to notice the temperature. That wasn't like her. I woke her up, and even when she was talking to me, she seemed really out of it. I had never seen her like that before. I closed the back door, made some soup for Jonathan, and brought it up to him. He was sitting up in bed the same way as yesterday. I asked him if he was doing okay and if he noticed the cold. It tends to be warmer on the higher floors anyway, so I wasn't too worried, and he said that he hadn't had any issues. I placed his bowl of soup on his nightstand for him and warned him to be careful of its heat. A piece of paper on his bedside table caught my eye. It read, "Okay, I'll let you in a sec." I held it up to him. "Jonathan, what is this?" "Oh, my friend came in to visit today." "What are you thinking, Jonathan? You have an extremely contagious illness, and you're supposed to be resting." I was very annoyed with his behavior. "No, I promise I didn't let him get too close, Dad. We just sat in the kitchen for an hour," he pleaded. "Was your mom okay with this?" I asked him. "Yeah, she told me I could have him in. She told me it was okay." I knew this was unlikely, but I figured I'd ask my wife about it first. She was helping herself to some soup downstairs when I walked in. "Hey, Jonathan says you let him have a friend over today. Is he telling the truth?" My wife looked up at me with her mouth full, paused, and then sighed, shaking her head, "No. He says they hung out in the kitchen. Did you see him?" "Honestly, they could have. I was asleep for the better part of the afternoon," she admitted. "That's weird. Normally you wake up at like the slightest noise." "I know, it was a weird sleep. I'm kind of still in a brain fog." I watched her silently as a look of discomfort grew on her face. "I'm not feeling well." "Alright, let's get you up to bed. You've had the chicken pox before in childhood, right?" "Yeah, I had it. I think I'm just tired." I got her up to bed and tucked in down the hall from Jonathan's room, and I peeked in on Jonathan before heading back downstairs. He appeared to be asleep. I spent an hour on my laptop in the kitchen watching YouTube videos and then got up to make myself some coffee. Our kitchen windows face the same back of the house as Jonathan's window, and from the back patio light I noticed a few sets of footprints in the mud. That's right, a few. Rather than one set of footprints coming and going to the back of the house, there were 2. I thought at first maybe Jonathan's friend had forgotten something that he had to come back for. Then I wondered, what if Jonathan went out? The thought of his potential irresponsibility made me furious. What if this was why he was having such a difficult recovery? That was when I started hearing a subtle spring noise from upstairs. I climbed up them quietly and peeked into Jonathan's room to see him dancing on the bed. "Jonathan, what are you doing?" I was absolutely livid, but I didn't want to wake his mother. He looked genuinely terrified to see that he had been caught, but then jumped onto the floor and apologized. "Sorry, Daddy. Did you go outside today?" I asked him exasperatedly. "What? No, I stayed inside, I promise." "Ugh. Whatever, Jonathan. We'll talk about it in the morning. It's late. Please go to bed." I was pretty frustrated with his lack of cooperation, and crashed myself right next to my wife. I woke up in the middle of the night. My alarm clock said 3 a.m. Jonathan was standing at my bedside, staring at me. I actually jumped back. I wasn't expecting to see a face. "Daddy, I can't sleep. I'm thirsty. Can you get me some water?" He knew how to get water himself, and I figured this must be the kind of coddling that his mother afforded him. But I was really too dazed to argue, and I said, "Sure, buddy. Just go back to bed. I'll bring it to you." "Okay," he replied, and walked back down the dark hallway. I walked to the end of the hall and maneuvered around the banister onto the stairs. We have these small lights on each step so that we can see where we're going in the darkness, but the one on the top step was out. But I knew well enough how to use stairs even when I couldn't see them, and I stepped onto it, which turned out to be a big mistake. I immediately slipped and caught myself on the railing, but not before twisting my back up real good. I was groaning in pain, and my son walked out of his dark room over to me. "Are you okay, Daddy?" he asked me hollowly. Yep, I'm okay. Just go back to bed. I'll bring your water to you." I managed to get the words out through the pain. As I filled a glass from the fridge tap, I noticed there was some sort of goo on the bottom of my foot, and that goo seemed like Vaseline. It was so late, I just felt confused. I avoided that step on my way back up the stairs. Jonathan was sitting up in bed when I brought him the water, but he had an expression on his face that I had never seen in him before. It was a big smile, like a fake person does when they're trying to be liked. Where had he seen that before? Since when do 6-year-olds try to be liked? That's the type of insecure behavior you expect from an adult. I thought about that look on his face for the next half hour before I managed to hit the hay again. The next morning, as I made my way to the ground floor, I noticed that the bulb on the light at the top step had been removed. It wasn't simply burnt out. Jonathan's mother was in his room rubbing VapoRub on his chest. The jar of VapoRub had been left in his room overnight, and I made the connection between its distinct smell and what I had encountered on the bottom of my foot the night before. I found myself, as I did on most Saturday mornings, in front of the coffee maker, and out the back window I saw those same familiar sets of footprints in the mud. In the daylight, I could see their pathing much further into the distance. All 4 sets of footprints appeared not to go into any of the other houses, but rather into the forest in the ravine. This just didn't sit right with me. I had to go explore. I got my shoes and coat on and went out, following them. It wasn't an easy trek through the woods by any means. I was walking over multiple thorn bushes and past burdock. After a good 20 minutes, one of the to the house sets of footprints appeared to veer off, but both sets of the away from the house footprints stuck together, along with the other to the house set of footprints. I assumed that since Jonathan was resting in his room, the path he had taken must have included both one set of to the house and one set of away from the house footprints, so I followed that grouping. Another 5 minutes of trudging, and the trees appeared to become a lot bigger in this area of the forest, and at last I saw the trail of footprints lead to the other side of one large tree and disappear. As I came around to the other side, I wasn't really sure what I was looking at. The tree was hollowed out and had been filled with a glowing orange solid. As my eyes explored it, I realized there was a child trapped inside, encased in amber, not moving. It was Jonathan. He was curled up into the fetal position, but I could see his face between his knees. His eyes were closed. It looked like he had already been sleeping when he was frozen. My heart skipped a few beats and then more than made up for it. I reached into my pocket for my phone and then realized I had forgotten it in the house. I looked around frantically, found a rock on the ground and tried to chip away at the amber, but it couldn't even be scratched. I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. It seemed like some sci-fi technology or something supernatural was keeping him prisoner, but I had figured out I wouldn't be able to do anything. I needed to call for help. I ran back to the house as fast as I could. A part of me was sure this was the same child I had just seen having vapor rub applied to him, but as I got to the back of my house, I realized I was dead wrong. My son was watching me from his bedroom window, and I stopped in my tracks. How was he up there? The way he was looking at me was so unlike anything I had seen from him before, and I realized in that moment that he wasn't my son. He was an imposter. I felt that time was of the essence, and I stormed into the house in search of my phone, but I couldn't find it anywhere. My wife was sleeping on the couch again. Was this also some form of supernatural activity? She usually slept very little. I was almost afraid to go up the stairs and confront the imposter, but my son's life was on the line. I kept my tone low as I entered his room so as not to wake my wife. "What have you done with my son?" I asked him very plainly, trying not to hit him. "What do you mean, Daddy? I'm right here," he replied with a mocking little smile on his face. I wanted to kill him right there, but he was wearing my son's face, and I just couldn't. Instead, I searched his room to the best of my ability for my phone, but again it was nowhere to be found. I ran down to the kitchen, got my keys, went into the garage and got in my car. It seemed for whatever reason he wasn't willing to harm my wife, but as the driveway door lifted, he was standing in it, blocking my path. And again, I just couldn't bring myself to run him over, even knowing that he wasn't my child. He looked exactly like him. I couldn't do it. "Who are you and what do you want?" I asked him, rolling my window down. He just stood there blankly, looking like he was calculating something. "What are you doing to my wife? Why is she sleeping all the time?" The kid just giggled. I revved the engine to let him know I wasn't waiting anymore. I figured he'd get out of the way anyway, and I hit the gas towards the driveway. He moved very fast, and he sure got out of the way, but I was trembling so hard I shook the wheel too bad and hit the side of the garage door. A few seconds later, my wife, awakened by the noise, was on the scene. "What have you done? What's going on?" She sounded very irritated when she saw the damage to the house and the car. The airbag had blown and I hit my head pretty hard against it. I thought I might have had a concussion. The imposter child started acting all sickly sweet in the presence of his mother, and she was trying her best to comfort him, telling him that he should go back to bed and rest, hugging him and kissing him and whatnot. Meanwhile, the little freak is making direct eye contact with me, giving me that same twisted smile he kept producing, just milking every bit of attention. She got him inside and I followed shortly behind. My wife called her brother, who lives on the other side of the city, if he could come give me a ride to the hospital to get my head checked out. I told her no, that I would go in the morning. I lied about how I was feeling, but I really just didn't want to leave her alone in the house with that thing. I was icing my head on the couch when she tucked him into bed at night, and she came back down to check on me before she went to bed herself. Hey, that's not our son. That's not our son. I tried to tell her. I really didn't want that thing to hear. Our real son is in the woods. He's trapped in amber inside a tree. I don't know how, but I swear I'm telling the truth. That thing in our son's room tried to kill me last night. Please, you've got to believe me. Oh, I think that's the concussion talking. You really should get your head checked out first thing in the morning. I appreciated that she was trying to be sweet to me, but it was really no help at all. She asked me one more time if I was sure that I wanted to sleep on the couch, and I confirmed that it supported my neck better than the bed. Really, that thing seemed to have a bloodlust for me, and I thought I'd be better prepared to deal with it down here if it came for me in the night. As soon as my wife tucked herself into bed upstairs, I got out my laptop and started doing some research. If the thing was supernatural, I needed to figure out what it was in order to deal with it. After a significant amount of research, I came to the conclusion that it was a changeling, a somewhat malevolent type of fairy that had been drawn to my son because of his illness. I wasn't sure what he wanted, and from different sources I got different answers, but one of them said that he wanted the love of a mother, and that was consistent with what I had seen. Now, to get rid of a changeling, one source I read said that you have to get it to admit its age or real name. That seemed like a difficult mind game, especially for such a cunning little creature. Another source I read said that if you treat them with extreme cruelty, they will take their leave. The examples of extreme cruelty given included whipping them or heating them in the oven. I closed my laptop, thinking this over. It was obviously going to be impossible to get my wife on board. And did I really have it in me? I remembered my son out in the middle of the forest at night, encased in amber, and I found the courage to do what needed to be done. I took the pot racks out of the oven and preheated it to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, I quietly climbed the stairs to Jonathan's room. He wasn't even in bed. He was standing up in the middle of the room, expecting me. "What are you doing, Daddy?" he asked in a very cold voice. I knew that the longer I drew this out, the harder I would be making it on myself. Picked him up and he started screaming for my wife. I had an arm firmly around his ribs as I dragged him down the stairs. He was trying to scratch at my face and was kicking at the banister. I got him into the kitchen, opened the oven door, and threw him inside. His screams were absolutely blood-curdling, and it still sounded identical to my son's voice. He was pushing hard on the oven door, trying to get out, and I had to hold it closed, all the while struggling, all the while hearing my son's voice, and all the while fighting back tears. My wife came running down the stairs to see me holding the oven door closed on what she thought was our son as he screamed. She became understandably hysterical and started attacking me, making it more difficult to hold the door closed. "What are you doing? What are you doing? Oh my God!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, punching me in the jaw and me having to take it. She screamed in a tone of pure anguish that I couldn't possibly try to reproduce and pulled a knife on me from one of the drawers. She tried to stab at me and I let go of the oven door to avoid it. The oven door fell open, revealing a terrible smell of charred clothing and flesh. The ashen body of my boy tumbled out, and my wife dropped the knife to attend to him, sobbing. Her sobs became wails, and she just asked me why I'd done it over and over again, and what I had done. 10 seconds passed, and I was beginning to think I'd made a mistake. I didn't think the creature would die. What if it had swapped itself back out for my real son at some point, and I had just murdered him? My God, I broke down and dropped to my knees, and for 10 seconds I couldn't stop trembling until the charred flesh on the body of the boy cracked away. A creature emerged that did look like a 12-year-old fairy boy, but it had scales rather than skin, and its eyes were low set and far apart. Its wings beat immeasurably fast like an insect, puffing smoke into the air with each revolution. It gave me the most deadpan look, and I felt genuine fear, but then it turned and flew off out the back window, simply phasing through it. My wife was clearly in shock, screaming something, but I couldn't hear her as I watched the fairy fall back into the forest in the direction of my son. I didn't waste time getting my coat or boots on. I ran barefoot through the muddy forest in the near darkness. The changeling was incredibly fast. I had no chance of catching up to it, and my wife was doing her best to chase behind me. I ran to the tree where my son had been to see the amber melting. I took my sleeping boy in my arms before he hit the ground, and my wife showed up just in time to see him open his eyes, both in disbelief and both crying with joy. Hey guys, I hope you liked that story. I'm gonna start doing these more try-hard creepypasta more often because I feel like genuinely proud of them when I'm done, and it makes YouTube a lot more fun for me, even though they're a lot more work to do. Give me some of that good old like, comment, and subscribe to show that you appreciate the effort, and I appreciate the hell out of you for watching, and for listening to something that I'm really genuinely passionate about. Also, tune in for Nightmare Theater on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can send me your nightmares to theforgottengrove@gmail.com and I'll read them on stream if you like. Until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.